It's the halfway mark of the season, so as usual it's time to have a quick look at how everything's going across all the teams in the paddock. Williams Renault. After 2 seasons of dominance, Williams are finding it a bit more of a struggle so far in 1994. Even before the tragic events of Imola, they were struggling to keep up with Schumacher and Benetton, and while we'll never know now whether Senna's trajectory would have mirrored Prost last year, a rough start followed by steady improvement and in the end a relatively easy title, it's not guaranteed that would have been the case. The FW16 just doesn't seem to work with the new regulations as well as the B194, though what difference the ongoing safety-based changes will make remains to be seen. The driver situation isn't helping either, with the sense that the team just don't have confidence in Hill taking over as lead driver, and many think they should be backing him up rather than trying to get Mansell back or fantasising about signing Schumacher. Tyrrell Yamaha. After a pretty dire 1993, this year has been pretty positive for Uncle Ken's team, and with the same engines as last year, the difference must be the return of Harvey Postlethwaite and his new 022 chassis. You could also point to the signing of Mark Blundell, who scored Yamaha's first ever podium in Spain, except for the fact that Ukio Katayama has been one of the revelations of the season, out-qualifying Blundell 6-2 and often running well in the top 10. If the team can fix the remaining reliability niggles, and with a modicum of luck, Ukio could yet score a podium himself, something that would have felt unthinkable to say this time last year. Benetton Ford. The championship table really does tell the story here, 6 wins from 8 for Schumacher, and even with the occupants of the second car not really delivering so far, they have a pretty handy lead in the constructors too. There continue to be mutterings about some kind of banned traction or launch controls, but there are always accusations of foul play when a team suddenly becomes competitive out of nowhere. We'll have to see what comes of that. We all knew Schumacher was good, but he's still impressed this year, not least in Spain, completing most of the race stuck in 5th gear. In the second car, you can't help but feel sorry for JJ Leto having such an awful accident at the point where he was poised to finally make a breakthrough, but given Benetton's history with Schumacher's teammates, it's possible that it wasn't to be anyway. Verstappen is certainly quick and exuberant, but his exuberance does need dialing in with more experience, and again Briatore and Walkinshaw don't seem to have a lot of patience for developing drivers. Perhaps he might be shuffled off on Ligier to develop his skills if they're going to be a Benetton B team in the future. McLaren Peugeot. After an unexpectedly competitive year in 1993 and having finally got Ford engine parity with Benetton, Ron Dennis might well be musing at the amount of effort he spent on chasing engine deals and how his cars might be faring with a Ford Zetec in the back instead. There doesn't appear to be much wrong with the MP49 except for the underpowered and unreliable Peugeot A6 in the back. It's essentially a sports car engine, which might have worked in F1 a year or two earlier, but things have moved on. Hakkinen and Brundle have both had a podium out of the car, though it's still clearly not on a competitive level with Benetton, Williams or Ferrari yet. Brundle seems to find it more difficult to get a fast qualifying lap in, which has meant he spent more time fighting with the Jordans in the midfield, but both drivers look decent enough if the car could be made to work. Footwork Ford. With the collapse of the Footwork sponsorship and the departure of drivers and engines at the end of 1993, things look pretty bleak for the team, if only for the early races to prove that the car, with the ex-McLaren Ford V8s in the back, was actually pretty decent with a 4th place for Fittipaldi at Aida. Their fragile gearbox has been a real problem, and it seems that the technical changes post-Imola have done something to the car because they've dropped off hugely in performance since Monaco. The drivers seem pretty evenly matched, though poor Morbidelli still has yet to see the checkered flag waved in his direction. Lotus Mugen Honda. The addition of the pretty powerful Mugen Honda V10 to replace the customer Ford V8 should have been the final piece in the puzzle for Lotus to fulfill the potential they showed throughout 1992 and 93. But instead of challenging regularly for podiums and aiming for best of the rest status behind the Big Four, they've only occasionally cracked the top 20 in qualifying, and while the car's reliable enough to have given them 6 top 10 finishes, that's mostly been down to attrition. Even the ever-cheerful Johnny Herbert is starting to look distinctly glum about the team's prospects, while Pedro Lamy didn't really do a lot to justify Peter Collins' apparently high rating of him before his accident, and Zanardi has been more noticeable for his avoidance of wing mirrors than any particular turn of speed. Unless something turns around soon, Lotus are going to find themselves in more financial difficulty too, as the sponsors start to jump ship again. Jordan Hart. Eddie Jordan can be pretty happy with his team's performance so far, especially with a brand new engine in the back, and Rubens Barrichello seems to usually end up duelling Martin Brundle somewhere around 4th place. The team's first podium at Aida was a boost, as was Team Old Boy Andrea de Cesaris' fine 4th place in Monaco, but after his enforced absence, Eddie Irvine will be hoping to do better in the second half of the season than a single point to Rubens' 9 so far. Eddie, like Verstappen, has an abundance of enthusiasm and a gung-ho attitude that can reap rewards, but he also needs to rein it in a bit. But Eddie Jordan has a history on that score and may well be a good fit for the Ulsterman. Larus Ford. After a boost in finances over the winter, the perennially strapped Larus team were looking forward to a better 1994, but it's not really materialised. The unfortunate Beretta has been dominated in qualifying by his more experienced teammate Comas, which was largely to be expected, and has had 6 technical retirements out of his 8 races so far. He did well enough on home ground at Monaco to show he's got something about him, but he'll be wanting to make enough impression in the next 2 races to raise funding to finish the season. Eric Comas, on the other hand, has been solid enough, scoring the team's only point at Aida, but again has only seen the finish 3 times, and by his own admission has kind of had the stuffing knocked out of him by Senna's death. He'll keep plugging away as long as he's needed, but the team may worry that they'll need to look for someone with a bit more drive to carry them forward. Minardi Ford. After a good year for Minardi in 1993 and an awful one for Scuderia Italia, the new merged team has been sort of an average of the two. The car, especially the new one, seems decent enough but struggles to get out of the midfield, and while both drivers have bags of experience and proven track records, you do have to wonder what a young charger like test driver Luca Badoer might be doing in the car instead. The unfortunate Alboreto has had all of the technical issues, only finishing twice so far, while Martini hasn't broken down once, all 3 of his retirements being collisions or spins. Maybe he's just more attuned with how Minardi do things, maybe he's getting preferential treatment in terms of parts, but in either case, 8th out of 10 teams to have scored so far is decent enough, and still puts them ahead of the likes of Lotus and Ligier. Ligier Renault. The ongoing saga over the team's ownership and subsequent managerial reorganisation won't have done the team any favours, and with little chance for development over the winter while all that was up in the air, the team have ended up still running last year's car while everyone else has moved on. Last year's car, of course, turned out to be quite good, and nearly beat Ferrari in the constructors' table, but staying still is moving backwards in this sport. And with all due respect to the drivers, Eric Bernard has never really impressed, and Olivier Panis is a rookie. A rookie who has been another of the revelations of 1994 so far, and attracted a lot of attention, particularly in France, but who knows what will happen to him next. In all honesty, the team probably needed a bit of a shake-up at the top, but the manner in which it's happened has demolished morale, especially since it's pretty obvious to all concerned that all Walkinshaw and Briatore are really interested in are the Renault engines. Ferrari. Jean Todt needed a swift improvement over the fiasco of 1991 through 3 if his tenure at Maranello wasn't to be very short, and he's definitely had it. The 412 T1 is fast, pretty and fairly reliable, and is up there with the Williamses fighting for Benetton's table scraps more often than not. Both cars have been in the points every time they've finished, and usually on the podium. Berger has had all the technical issues again, with 4 breakdowns to a lazy's none, though Jean has on occasion had to nurse an ailing car home. The Tifosi and Italian media demand wins, of course, not incremental improvements, but Ferrari seem in a much better place to deliver than they have been in some years, even if it will probably take something happening to Schumacher to make it happen. Saura Mercedes. A difficult year for the sophomore team after Wendlinger's awful accident in Monaco and their chief sponsor's cheque bouncing, and it's only thanks to their Mercedes links that they aren't really floundering for money right now. But results have been a little disappointing, with a string of lower points finishes but looking a lot more like midfielders, and there are already rumours that Mercedes are losing patience and casting about for a top team to link up with, which, assuming Benetton do switch to Renault and Williams stay with the Diamond, means McLaren. Does that mean instead of Sauber or as well as? Peter and co will be wanting to know. In the meantime, De Cesaris has been a solid enough substitute for Wendlinger, and as it looks unlikely the Austrian will return at least this year, he should be able to prove decent backup for Frentzen, now thrust into the team leader role like Damon Hill. He could do with a bit more seasoning, but has scored a couple of times and generally looks like a good prospect for the future, if not the finished article quite yet. Simtek Ford. It's difficult to imagine a more difficult start to the season for any team, let alone a brand new one, without even the experience of junior formula to lean on. One driver killed in their third race, a second seriously injured in their fifth, and yet they've still looked much the better of the two new teams this year. David Brabham has been an absolute star for them, and Roland Ratzenberger's personal sponsor, Barbara Bailau, was so impressed by how well the team have handled everything that just before the Monaco Grand Prix, she dropped a massive investment in the team, apparently equivalent to what she would have paid for Roland Ratzenberger to drive for a full season. Gounod, who took a lot of flack in his two outings for Minardi last year, has done well enough in his two races so far, and will hope to build on that, but he's won a lot of people over just by having the courage to step into that number 32 Simtech. Pacific Ilmor. On paper it should have been no contest between the two new teams. Simtech, with no racing history as an organisation and a technical legacy of a couple of failed chassis and a customer Ford engine, versus Pacific, who'd won time after time in junior formulae with a chassis built from input from Rory Byrne, then at Renault, essentially the same engine as in the Saura Mercedes, and the experienced and pretty rapid Bert Gachot at the wheel. And yet, the year has been nothing short of a disaster. Part of the problem is undoubtedly that the PR01 chassis was developed for 1993, but had to be held for a year for financial reasons. The engine is really 2 years old at this point, and with no title sponsor, there's just no money for development. Paul Belmondo never really convinced during his time at March in 1992, and he's not really looking much better here. Granted, there's not a lot he can do in this car, and undoubtedly Gachot is getting the lion's share of the team's meagre resources, but Paul is usually full seconds off Bert's pace. Apart from at the first race of the year, the only reason either of the cars have made the grid is because of the reduced entry list post Imola and Monaco. Neither of them have finished, and it's difficult to see that improving much. So that's where they all sit at the halfway point of the season, and as it happens it's also where I take a couple of weeks off to go on holiday. But fear not, because I've queued up a two-part special for you lovely people to celebrate 3,000 subscribers, actually 3,128 as I read this, and then we'll pick up with 1994 and the German Grand Prix when I return.